head on back there now. And for the rest of us, we're going to look at the Song of Solomon today. Song of Solomon or Song of Songs, depending on your Bible translation. The older translations use Song of Solomon. The newer translations use the Song of Songs. Justin, I'm going to go ahead and turn. Oh, you get it? Okay, very good. All right. So you all can hear me, aren't you glad? Okay, Song of Songs. I'm going to look at chapter 6 today, verses 1 through 3. Song of Songs, chapter 6, 1 through 3. Where has your beloved gone, O most beautiful among women? Where has your beloved turned, that we may seek him with you, together in the garden of love? My beloved has gone down to his garden, to the bed of spices, to graze in the gardens, and to gather lilies. I am my beloved's, and my beloved is mine. He grazes among the lilies. So I'm going to do something that I have never done. I'm going to attempt to preach a sermon from the Song of Solomon, also known as the Song of Songs. This is a very strange book in the Bible. The name of God is never mentioned in the Song of Solomon. New Testament writers do not quote from the Song of Solomon. They do not refer to the Song of Solomon or Song of Songs. This book seems to be mainly concerned with Solomon and some woman that he is in love with. It's a poetical language book in Eastern Asian culture that's different than our culture, the way that we look at poetry today. I'm trying to think, what was the purpose that Solomon would write this book in the first place? And then what is the purpose that it is in Scripture? Why do we have it today? So maybe you've read the book, The Song of Solomon, Song of Songs. Hopefully you read it this week as we've been reading through the Bible. It is very interesting reading. And so I say that I am going to attempt to preach from this book because if you know me, I embarrass easily. In fact, Darla will tell you that my face turns red often if I get embarrassed. And if you start talking about body parts and bodily functions, I'm just going to put my fingers in my ears and say a bunch of la 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 or something so that I don't have to hear all that. That's just TMI, right? Too much information for me. Now, it's interesting. I'm going to be gone on a Sunday in October to go up to Waco to do a half Ironman, to participate in one up there. And so I was talking to John about the sermon on that Sunday and the reading of the Scripture before that Sunday. And it's going to be in Lamentations and Ezekiel. And he said to me, oh, I see what you're doing. You're going to be gone just because you don't want to preach through Lamentations and Ezekiel. And I said, oh, no. If I was going to do that, I would be gone today so that I don't have to preach through the Song of Solomon. In fact, I was ready to tell Cody, your next preaching assignment is the Song of Solomon. Might as well do it now. This Song of Songs is an explicit and detailed conversation between a man and a woman. As I mentioned, the older translations say Song of Solomon. The newer translations say Song of Songs. Song of Songs means it's the song above all songs is where they get that title. So how do you interpret this book? What do we do with this book that doesn't talk about God, doesn't tell us how to follow God? And if we think about it, that task of what do we get from this has been debated. So if you look back at church and synagogue history, really from all the way up to about the year 1200, they had written actually a lot of commentaries. There were like over 100 commentaries written on the Song of Songs, and many sermons and lessons were preached and taught on the Song of Songs. But their theme was basically the same theme. They treated it as an allegory, so that it was symbolic, figurative. So every part of it meant something, and they would try to tell you all the different things that it could mean. But it was a very popular book, actually, back then for writing and for preaching and teaching. Then in the middle of the 1800s, scholars challenged that view of the Song of Solomon and said it's not an allegory, it's not figurative, but we need to read it as a literal work. And it is a book about romance and human love between a man and a woman. Interestingly enough, after that came out and that became the main teaching of the Song of Songs, very few commentaries were written and very few sermons were preached about the Song of Songs. The Song of Solomon contains dialogue between a man and a woman deeply in love with each other, and they express their love in the most intimate language. Also, I need to just tell you, one of the other reasons I struggle with this, I'm just not very good at poetry. Not writing it, of course, but even the interpretation of poetry and that type of language. I remember when I was in college, I took a Shakespeare class for one of my literature classes. And so I go into the class and I'm in reading, we're having to read all this Shakespeare, and the professor's up there saying, okay, read this section of Shakespeare and I want you to come back and I want you to interpret it, tell us what's going on behind the scenes, why did he write what he wrote, and all these different things. I was completely lost. I could barely understand what I was reading, much less come up with any sort of interpretation or fill in the blanks of what was happening behind the scenes. I struggled in that class because I just don't think that way. And so it's interesting when I was doing some reading about the Song of Songs that, a lot of the commentaries talk about this relationship and all the things that were happening in this relationship between Solomon, that's generally who they say, and this woman. And I just see two people writing and flattering each other for this entire book. So many people, what they come up with is that this man, probably Solomon, meets a country girl in her vineyard. They desire each other. They want to be together. Commentaries have been written that said that they get married, they have problems, they resolve those problems, and live happily ever after. Kind of like a romantic comedy of today's modern movies, right? So what do you do with that? What do you do with that for our lives today? Well, I want to look at these ideas of what people have done with the Song of Songs long ago and more recently, and talk about relationship, to see what we can learn about relationships with these words from the Song of Songs. So let's begin with a very personal relationship. Let's learn today to learn to show your love to your spouse, because that's what this is all about. It's about a married couple. Start out, they get together, they're going to get married, they get married, and they're still talking with this language, this love language towards one another. And so we can learn, those of you who are married, learn to show your love to your spouse. Again, getting away from the figurative idea, just the literal way of what they're saying, you can see two people, as I said, who just continue to tell each other how much they love them. And we can learn from that dialogue. And there's some examples of things that we can do in our lives from what we learn in this dialogue between these two people. One of the things we can do is you can grow in your desire to be with your spouse. And that's very important. I bring that up because that is important, because after you get married, sometimes couples can start having sort of separate lives. You get busy with life, you get busy with work, you get busy with your family, with your children, your activities, your hobbies, the different things that you are involved in. And if you're not careful, if you're not paying attention, then you can just start living these two separate lives. And so the lesson we can learn in this is to make sure you continue growing in this desire to be with your spouse. Sometimes we get comfortable, we get distracted, we're not always careful of how we respond and what we say, and slowly, if we're not careful, we'll do things and say things that just kind of chip away at that relationship, and it's just not as full of passion that it was before. Solomon said to his bride in chapter 4, verse 9, "You have captivated my heart, my sister, my bride. You have captivated my heart with one glance of your eyes." So this is like love at first sight, but as he saw her eyes, and that was the the love at first sight. Now, he calls her sister, but she's not his biological sister. You see, where we grew up, there was a state near our state that we would joke that guys would marry their sisters. But that is state hate speech, and so I'm not going to say which state we were talking about. But when you fall in love, you know this, when you fall in love, you're captivated. And so what we can find from what's going on here is to build on that. Remember that passion. Continue to pursue your spouse, to stay captivated. That's a lesson that we can learn from the Song of Songs. Something else we can learn, speak uplifting and loving words. So when you're talking to your spouse, speak uplifting and loving words. And again, we start to nitpick if we're not careful. We lose patience if we're not paying attention to things. And after a while, we will respond differently than we used to respond. In fact, sometimes we say things to our spouse and to our family that we would never even say to a stranger. We would treat them much better with more patience. And so we need to examine ourselves. How is my response to my spouse? Is it uplifting or is it deflating? I keep bringing up this idea about what we say, but the Bible keeps talking about what we say and telling us be careful with what we say. And so I think we just need those reminders over and over again in our lives. So examine that. Take a look. Examine and listen to what you're saying and listen to how you're responding to your spouse. Now, if you want, you can try some of these lines from the Song of Songs. And I'm going to give you some examples of those today, but we're going to keep it rated G, just so you know from the very beginning. So here's one line. Chapter 1, verse 15. Behold, you are beautiful, my love. Behold, you are beautiful. Your eyes are doves. Now, that's not, I hope if you're a white wings hunter, I don't know if that has the same effect, but it's very romantic type language. But we need to be careful. Be careful with the animal and bird theme in the nature scene. There's another quote that you may not want to use, guys, with your wife. Chapter 4, verse 1 and 2. Behold, you are beautiful, my love. Behold, you are beautiful. Your eyes are doves behind their veil. Your hair is like a flock of goats leaping down the slopes of Gilead. Your teeth are like a flock of shorn ewes that have come up from the washing, all of which bear twins, and not one among them has lost its young. Now, I told you I'm not very good at this interpreting thing, but I can interpret this one. He says, you're very pretty, you have beautiful hair, and you have pretty white teeth, and you're not missing any of them. I mean, there's your compliment. So I don't know if you want to use that as poetry, but there's some ideas for you. And ladies, there's some good material for you here as well, for the husband. Chapter 5, verse 14. His arms are rods of gold set with jewels. His body is polished ivory, bedecked with sapphires. That's pretty nice to say to your husband. Yeah. But the point is that we just need to continue to affirm. We need to continue to encourage one another. We need to continue to compliment one another along the way. Godly spouses use words of encouragement to each other. And again, the point's not to be a poet, although if you are, that's great. The point is that we should use our words to build up and lift up our spouse. In a good marriage, a husband and wife are never stingy with kind and endearing words. Something else you can do, you can brag to others about your spouse. The woman, she brags about her beloved. Chapter 2, verse 8 and 9. The voice of my beloved, behold, he comes, leaping over the mountains, bounding over the hills. My beloved is like a gazelle or a young stag. So she's bragging about this guy. And we see this theme in the Song of Songs that the man and the woman, they just want to be together. Their desire is to be together and to continue to grow. And so you can see that they get along. That dialogue is very important as we think about our relationship, our family relationship, our relationship with our spouse, that we are able to brag about them and commend them. And I've mentioned Facebook several times about some of the things that can be bad about social media. One thing I have noticed a few times is that periodically somebody, maybe it's for a birthday or something, an anniversary or something like that, but I'll see that a wife is complimenting her husband, or a husband is complimenting his wife on Facebook with their post, for their birthday or anniversary, telling how important they are and how special they are. So that's good. I mean, so we can use these different ways to be able to brag about our spouse. Now, I'm going to talk about the dating relationship a little bit, because in the dating relationship, this is the most unrealistic part of your relationship together, right? Because you're just captivated by that person and they're perfect. You get married, you find out they're not perfect, but that's okay. We're not perfect. And but that in that dating relationship, that's where we're just totally captivated. And that's good. That's the way it should be. It's building that growth in that relationship and that love, and that's good, because then it'll you want that to build into a good and proper relationship together as you're married. But I have seen and noticed at times of some people dating that they fight all the time, and they're breaking up all the time, and they're coming back together, and they're not lifting each other up, and they're not encouraging one another, and there's always friction and maybe some bitterness and things like that happening in there. And I look at that situation, I said, this is supposed to be the best part of the relationship, at least in that feeling of love. And if it's like this now, it's just got to be a red flag, that how can it turn out to be something better later on? I look at those kinds of relationships and say, they're headed to a bad ending. And better to have it end in that ending before marriage, before there's a family, before there's kids. And so we need to just so if you have any influence with anybody and you're noticing that, have a talk with them, because this is, what we see here, we know that the passion and this captivating feeling can easily go away after you get married. If it's not there before, then there's really trouble in the future. And so just to be an encouragement for them to make sure that they are encouraging, they are doing the right things, they are saying the beneficial and blessing things to each other. So as we look at this, the one big problem with the Song of Solomon and this whole thing of the love between this one man and his wife is that if this is Solomon, well, he had 1,000 wives, right? And so then it's like, wait a minute here. How can this be Solomon talking about this one relationship if he had all these wives? Where was this total devotion to one woman? And so maybe it was a poem of how it should be for King Solomon, but wasn't. Maybe it was a poem written for Solomon because somebody felt like he needed to hear something like that. There's different theories, different ideas of who wrote the Song of Songs, and if it was Solomon that's in it, or if it's for Solomon. Different ideas about that. But the one thing we do get here is the relationship in this book, in the Song of Songs, gives us the picture of a loving and growing relationship. So that's one way to look at it. And again, from mid-1800s until today, that seems to be the main way that people have interpreted and looked at the Song of Solomon. But let's look at that other relationship that was there, that was the focus of the Song of Songs before. In fact, there's a little, maybe you sang it at camp or vacation Bible school. I'm my beloved and he is mine. His banner over me is love. That's a song to Jesus, and it comes from the Song of Solomon. And so let's look at the second relationship we need to learn. You need to learn to show your love for God, to show your love to God. Again, this is the way that this was looked at all the way up until the mid-1800s. Now we know this. We know in the Old Testament, the relationship between God and Israel, his people, was shown and talked about through this picture of a husband and his wife. God was the husband, Israel, his people, they were his wife. And we see from this that as you read, that this relationship is a close and intimate relationship that requires trust and fidelity to succeed. And as we're going to move forward in our reading of the Old Testament and we started Isaiah, and we're going to read through Isaiah and the other prophets, we're going to see a message over and over again that Israel, the wife, was a very bad wife. That Israel was not faithful to God. And over and over they're being told and warned about their life because they aren't being faithful to God. And so we see this picture, though. God is the husband, Israel is the wife in the Old Testament. Now you get to the New Testament, and you see it with Christ and the church. That's the relationship. That's how it's described in the New Testament, that Jesus is the groom and the church is the bride. In Ephesians, Paul talks about this mystery when he talks about this mystery of marriage. It's in Ephesians chapter 5, verse 31 and 32. Therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This mystery is profound, and I am saying that it refers to Christ and the church. So Paul is saying here in Ephesians 5 that this relationship between husband and wife describes the relationship between Christ and the church. That marriage is a picture of that relationship. And in the book of Revelation, we see the vision of the bride and the groom who are getting married. Revelation chapter 19, verse 7 and 8. Let us rejoice and exult and give him the glory, for the marriage of the Lamb has come, and his bride has made herself ready. It was granted her to clothe herself with fine linen, bright and pure, for the fine linen is the righteous deeds of the saints. So unlike the picture of the Old Testament of the wife not being faithful to the husband, to God, in the New Testament, the picture, at least in the fulfillment of things, is that the church, the bride of Christ, is faithful to Christ, shown as wearing fine linen, bright and pure. So therefore, this love talk in the Song of Songs, which again is very explicit, has been interpreted for a long time as the love between God and his people in New Testament time, between Christ and the church. So the man, if you use this figurative language, the man would be God and the woman would represent God's people. Now, that type of literature is not really unusual in the Bible. It's found in other places. This is just like the only book that's just totally focused on, if that is it, that type of literature. Even in the Proverbs, where we're learning about wisdom, wisdom is described as she, a woman. In fact, in Proverbs chapter 9, we get the two women that are found in the book of Proverbs. All throughout, they're described in chapter 9. In Proverbs chapter 9, verse 1, it says, wisdom has built her house. She has hewn her 7 pillars. And then verses 1 through 12 describe a woman who's God's wisdom. This woman is God's wisdom, who's calling to people, come to me, get to know me, have this right relationship with me, and you will live and have this good life with the Lord. And so wisdom is good, and she is shown as a woman. But then you get down to verse 13, Proverbs 9:13, and there's another woman. The woman Folly is loud, she is seductive and knows nothing. But this woman is doing the same thing. She's calling out to God's people in the verses following. She's calling out to God's people and trying to bring them in, to seduce them in, to lead them away from God into death. The woman wisdom, she leads them to life. But this woman, Folly and Sin, she's trying to lead people to death. But both of them are calling out to us, and who are we going to follow in our lives? And again, obviously from Proverbs, we see that we're supposed to follow this woman, Wisdom, to follow wisdom, the wisdom of God in our lives. And we see those pictures in the Bible. Again, in Revelation, I mentioned the bride clothed in white, but the other woman that's mentioned in Revelation is the prostitute, and all the description of her. The woman, she's the church, followers of God. This prostitute, she's trying to get people to not follow God in their lives, maybe a false prophet or something like that. And so this is a tool used in literature, used in the Bible, to describe a spiritual relationship using the metaphor of people and basically making it alive like a person, and we just listen to their voice and listen to their conversations. So as you read through the Song of Solomon, Song of Songs, you can ask yourself, do I desire to be with God? Remember, there was this desire that they had to be together. Do I have that desire to be with God in my life? And do I speak praise to Him, just like they were flattering each other and saying all sorts of good things to each other in my life, in my relationship? Do I sing praises to God? Do I speak praises to God for who He is and what He's done in my life? And as they were bragging about each other, do I tell others how great God is? And so we can learn some lessons in our spiritual life from the Song of Songs as we look at using this idea, this figurative language maybe, to look at our relationship with God. So I think we made it through the Song of Solomon today. It took me 38 years in ministry to preach a sermon from the Song of Solomon, so maybe in 38 more years I'll preach another one, okay? So let's, before we have our invitation song this morning, we're going to have a baptism today, and so we're going to have a confession, and